Step through the palace gates of ancient China, and you enter a world where beauty was judged more ruthlessly than power. The emperor did not simply choose his male favorites. At random, candidates were inspected, tested, and trained in ways that will leave you stunned. Skin had to be flawless, like polished jade. Movements were rehearsed until every glance, every bow was perfection. Some were chosen for wit, others for obedience, and many were reduced to little more than possessions cataloged in secret registers. To serve in the emperor's inner circle meant wealth and danger in equal measure. One wrong gesture could cost you everything. This is the hidden story of how male concubines were selected, groomed, and discarded in the heart of China's Forbidden City. Tell me in the comments what time you're watching this, and if exploring history's most forbidden secrets excites you. Subscribing is always your choice, but the next revelations only get darker. The clang of the gates still rattles in your chest, but it isn't the sound itself that shocks you. It's the thought that here behind red walls and golden tiles, beauty is a hunt, and you've just been tossed into the game. The Forbidden City spreads in front of you like a maze, built not of bricks, but of eyes, every glance cutting sharper than a blade. You expect ceremony, incense, maybe even poetry, but what you get is judgment, silent, constant, suffocating. It's almost funny, isn't it? You thought emperors simply picked their favorites like one might pick fruit at a stall. But the truth is, the whole palace became an audition stage. The courtyards are wide open and gleaming, yet you can feel how they shrink the moment you step in. Every stride you take is measured, every twitch of your fingers noted. The place was designed for surveillance, not comfort. Think of it like walking into a modern job interview, but with a twist. Instead of showing your CV, you are the CV. Your skin, your posture, even the way your hair catches the light. These are your bullet points. Do you stand tall enough? Do you bow deeply enough? Can you walk without stumbling on the polished stones? Every detail becomes evidence, and you can't help but feel the absurdity pressing on your ribs. Rumors, though, move faster than footsteps. You overhear whispers about candidates collected from across the empire, chosen for their refinement or for their family's ambition. One boy might be the son of an official, another, perhaps just a provincial youth caught in someone's approving gaze. Imagine the whiplash one day. You're studying classics in a village schoolroom. The next day, you're shoved into robes and paraded through a marble courtyard, judged by strangers who hold your future like dice in their hands. Would you call that luck? Or would you call it a trap dressed in silk? The system is cruel in its efficiency. The emperor, of course, was the final authority, but he rarely glanced at the raw stream of newcomers. His choices came already sifted, polished, and staged by eunuchs and officials who knew how to present talent like auctioneers. Families bribed for better placement, courtiers whispered names like stock tips, and eunuchs wielded more influence than most realize. To be honest, it was less about love, or even attraction, more about power disguised as preference. And yet the gossiping servants made it sound like a lottery jackpot. One lucky glance could change your whole bloodline's fortunes. You pass under carved dragons twisting on the beams, their scales shimmering with lacquer. They were meant to project moral authority, but irony drips down those golden edges. Beneath the slogans of harmony and virtue, emperors were deciding who pleased them most, and bureaucrats were busy turning beauty into paperwork. If you've ever sat in a boardroom where the slide deck promises team values, While everyone silently plots who gets the promotion, you've basically lived a shadow of this system. The hypocrisy is timeless. What makes the palace intimidating is not just the grandeur, but the awareness that everything is layered with double meanings. A glance is never just a glance. A smile is never just a smile. The person who praises you today may sabotage you tomorrow. Even the walls, painted with scenes of order, feel complicit in the farce. You wonder, did the stone lions at the gates roll their unseen eyes at the parade of selections? History doesn't record their opinion, but you can imagine. Step by step, you feel the weight of the gates behind you. They didn't just let you in, they sealed your exit. Ahead lies a labyrinth where your worth will be decided not by what you know or what you can do, but by how you appear, how you move, and whether you catch the Emperor's fleeting interest. The game has begun, and there is no referee, only spectators who judge from every shadow. You don't even get the chance to breathe before the eunuchs close in. They glide across the marble, like shadows stitched to the floor robes, swishing eyes sharp. You expect them to be indifferent, maybe even gentle, but instead, their gaze slices through you as if they've been trained for this moment their entire lives. And in a way they have. These men, or what remains of them, hold the first filter to the Emperor's world. It's not the Emperor who notices you first. It's them, the watchmen of appearance, the curators of flesh. Their role is almost paradoxical. Once stripped of family ties, and heirs of their own eunuchs devoted themselves entirely to palace life. That devotion often translated into a brutal practicality. They knew what the Emperor liked, what he found tiresome, and what could even irritate him enough to end someone's chances. Think of them like the world's most unforgiving talent scouts. Instead of asking for your portfolio or your test scores, they tilt their heads, scan your stance, and silently mark whether you have the symmetry, the bearing, or the shine that might please. Imagine the pressure of being judged by someone whose survival depends on making the right recommendation. Some of them speak in clipped phrases, commenting on the curve of a neck or the smoothness of skin. Others stay silent, simply raising a brow that signals everything. You notice how a single flick of their sleeve can determine whether someone is waved onward or dismissed. The entire spectacle feels almost theatrical, except the stakes are carved into bone. You can't help but ask yourself, would you rather be noticed or ignored in this situation? Because both options carry risks. The eunuchs are not just gatekeepers. They are historians of beauty. They remember who was chosen years before, who fell out of favor, and who was quietly sent away. Their memories become a living archive that shapes every decision they make. If you look nervous, one of them might smirk as if recalling another boy who trembled on the same spot decades ago. If you stand tall, another might nod, remembering how confidence once caught an emperor's eye. The air becomes heavy with their recollections, even if none are spoken aloud. What's unnerving is how casual they make it all seem. They don't announce verdicts with trumpets. They merely shuffle lists, murmur names, and gesture at scribes to make notes. It reminds you of modern audition panels on TV, judges exchanging glances, whispering, while contestants sweat under the lights. Except here, there's no cheering audience or dramatic music. Just silence punctuated by the scratching of brushes on bamboo slips. It's bureaucracy dressed in ritual. Sometimes the eunuchs play little tests. They might spill a cup of tea near your feet just to see how you react. Do you flinch? Do you bend down to help? Do you freeze in place? Each action becomes evidence of your temperament. Quick anger, out. Timid hesitation, out. A calm response. That might just be worth jotting down. You realize with a shiver that you are not only judged for your body, but for your reflexes, for the way your soul leaks out in split seconds. One eunuch in particular catches your eye. His face is lined, his back bent, but his gaze remains sharper than any blade. This is the type who has survived multiple reigns, multiple emperors shifting tides of taste. Imagine the stories he could tell if he dared. He's seen boys rise from obscurity to embroidered robes, and he's seen others vanish into oblivion. His smirk tells you he knows exactly, while every step deeper into the palace feels like a narrowing funnel. The eunuchs don't need to bark orders. Their quiet authority does enough. They point, they measure, they decide, and suddenly whole lives pivot. Behind them, scribes log the outcomes, turning flesh into ink on registers. Names are reduced to brushstrokes, faces to annotations, potential futures to a neat line in a ledger. The casualness of it all makes your skin prickle. You wonder if the eunuchs ever pitied those they rejected. Probably not. In their world, pity is weakness. They aren't here to comfort. They're here to curate. And perhaps, just perhaps, the eunuchs feel a strange satisfaction in this power. Once robbed of their own lineage, they control who might shape the imperial bloodline next. It's a cruel trade, but one that defines the rhythms of palace life. By the time you leave their gaze, you don't feel like yourself anymore. You feel like a file, a candidate, a fragment of a larger machinery. The eunuch's eyes remain behind you, heavy and unblinking, as if you'll carry their judgment forever. What's the first thing someone notices about you? Your laugh, your voice, or maybe the way your skin glows under a certain light. In the palace, the answer is far simpler and far crueler. It's your skin. You hear it described with metaphors so overblown they could be mistaken for lines of poetry, as smooth as polished jade, as radiant as morning dew, fragrant like blossoms. You almost want to laugh, if only the scrutiny didn't sting so much. The eunuchs and attendants inspect the surface of your body as if they were evaluating porcelain vases ready to reject even the tiniest crack. Bathing here is less about cleanliness and more about transformation. You're ushered toward steaming basins where rose petals float, oils shimmer, and servants whisper instructions. Imagine being told not just how to wash, but how to exude a scent, how to let perfume cling to you as though it were part of your essence. The empire discovered long ago that fragrance creates memory. One whiff of sandalwood or musk could recall a person far more vividly than their face. You realize that in this world, smell is a strategy. The obsession goes beyond scent. Attendants check for blemishes, scars, even sunburn. Pale, unmarked skin is prized because it suggests a life of leisure and protection. In a society where most people toiled in fields, under blistering sun paleness, symbolized privilege. It's like the opposite of today's obsession with tanning salons and beach trips, proof that beauty standards always find ways to flip upside down. Can you imagine a farmer's son, suddenly scrubbed and perfumed, expected to look like he had never seen daylight? The absurdity would be laughable if it weren't so rigidly enforced. The grooming rituals themselves border on theatrical. Servants rub powdered pearl across arms, and faces brush hair until it shines like lacquer and polish nails until they catch the lantern light. Every step feels exaggerated, yet each exaggeration serves the emperor's gaze. And the candidates learn quickly that standing still is part of the performance. You don't fidget, you don't cough. You let others sculpt you into an image of serenity. The irony is that serenity is the last thing you feel while strangers judge the slope of your shoulders. There's an unspoken cruelty in how bodies become commodities. One boy is dismissed because of a birthmark, another for a crooked tooth. No appeals, no second chances. You wonder if the rejected ever breathe easier once they're out relieved to escape the suffocating standards, or if they spend the rest of their lives haunted by the what-ifs. What about you? Would you want to be chosen if it meant living under endless scrutiny? Or would you rather fade into anonymity? Yet sometimes the process feels almost comical. Officials describe skin with such elaborate metaphors that you suspect they're showing off their literary skills more than making honest assessments. His complexion glows like snow, reflecting dawn, one might write. Really, snow at dawn. It's hard not to roll your eyes, even as you stand there, being compared to weather patterns. The exaggeration masks the fact that all they're doing is inspecting pores under candlelight. Still beneath the exaggeration lies truth. Appearance could shift destiny. Stories circulate of candidates who impressed not with wit or lineage, but with flawless skin or a distinctive fragrance. One moment they were nobodies, the next they were carried into chambers with silk curtains and guarded doors. These tales swirl around you like incense smoke, half warning, half temptation. Do you dare to believe them? The servants lean closer now, their fingers cool against your arm as they test texture, their noses almost comically near as they judge scent. It feels invasive, but you quickly realize it's routine here. They aren't embarrassed. Why should they be? To them, you're less a person than a potential commodity, and commodities must be tested for quality. It's unsettling, but it explains why grooming in the palace borders on obsession. And so, you stand polished and perfumed skin, gleaming under lamplight, knowing that the very surface of your body has been turned into a resume. Forget what you've studied. Forget your ambitions here. Jade-like smoothness carries more weight than years of learning. Your eyes are no longer your own. They're being trained, tested, and disciplined like prized horses. You thought a gaze was just something that happened naturally. But here, even the way you look at someone is an art form that could determine whether you rise to silk cushions or sink into obscurity. Too bold, and you're labeled arrogant. Too timid, and you vanish into the background. It's an impossible tightrope, and every step of your eyes is judged more harshly than your words. The eunuchs begin their quiet corrections, slipping commands into the air, like blades sliding through silk. Hold steady. Don't dart about like a frightened bird. Lower them, but not too low. You realize quickly that glances are a language, and inside these walls, that language is as formal as poetry. A single flick of your eyes could whisper respect, rebellion, or ridicule. Imagine sending a text message today where a single misplaced emoji gets you canceled. Here the stakes are life-defining, and the keyboard is your face. History is full of examples whispered into your ear. One emperor who adored attendants with soft, downcast eyes that radiated humility. Another who fell for the daring youth who stared back boldly as if saying, "I belong here." The lesson is bitter. You aren't expressing yourself. You're expressing what you think the emperor wants. Your gaze becomes a costume stitched not from fabric, but from instinct drilled into submission. Worse, you're expected to read others' eyes with the same precision. A rival's long stare might be a provocation. A eunuch's squint a silent warning, the emperor's narrowed gaze, a verdict before the sentence is spoken. The palace turns into a hall of mirrors where everyone's survival depends on interpreting reflections. Can you picture trying to fall asleep, knowing even your dreams might betray you if your eyes move the wrong way at the wrong time? Candidates practice in polished bronze mirrors, rehearsing half smiles and subtle tilts of the head. They perfect the art of looking humble, without seeming weak, attentive, without seeming desperate. It's ridiculous grown attendants turning their eyeballs into rehearsed choreography. But then you remember the stakes, and the comedy dissolves. What choice did they have? The gaze becomes a battlefield where no weapons clash, only pupils and lashes. You notice how rivals glance sideways, how they measure whether you flinch, and how quickly gossip spreads about a single inappropriate look. In a place where words can be censored, eyes become the truest language and the most dangerous. The first thing you notice is the smell. A sweet haze of incense and orchid oil clings to the air so thick it makes you lightheaded. Your ears catch the faint pluck of strings, a zither humming in the background, and somewhere beyond the curtain, a voice recites lines of verse with more polish than feeling. You're not in a simple hall anymore. You've been dragged into a stage, and the script has been prepared long before you set foot on the polished tiles. The tests arrive dressed as entertainment. One attendant presses a lute into your hands, another places a scroll of poetry before you, and you realize quickly this is less about pleasure and more about sorting. Can you pluck a melody without fumbling? Can you recite couplets with grace? The emperor doesn't want clumsy silence. He wants the hum of refinement, the promise that beauty extends beyond your face. And so, the palace turns into the strangest kind of classroom, except the grades aren't written in ink. They're etched into your future. Some candidates stumble immediately. Fingers trip across strings, voices crack, and eunuchs exchange smirks sharp enough to cut. You can almost hear them whisper, "Not fit for more than sweeping floors." Others surprise everyone pulling a tune from memory or shaping words with an elegance that makes the hall pause. Talent, after all, is unpredictable, and sometimes the least polished figure hides the richest song. You catch yourself wondering, if you were tested like this right now, could you pass? Or would your voice betray you before the second verse? But the tests aren't just about skill. They're about composure. A boy who laughs at his own mistake might earn points for charm, while one who freezes earns none. The emperor doesn't just want music. He wants resilience dressed in melody. Isn't that what every leader craves, to be surrounded by attendants who entertain, soothe, and endure? There are other subtler trials, too. Servants might drop a line of a poem and wait to see if you can complete it. They might hand you a fan with painted calligraphy and watch how you hold it awkwardly or with grace. Even the way you sit is examined as if posture itself is a form of wit. In the modern world, maybe you've been told to sit straight in an interview. Here, that single detail could mean the difference between rising to favor or fading back into the crowd. The layering of music, poetry, and manners is deliberate. It ensures that only those with both refinement and adaptability can pass. And sometimes it works like a trap. Candidates who shine too brightly may spark envy, while those who seem too ordinary vanish in obscurity. Balance becomes the mantra of survival. Talented, but not threatening. Graceful, but not arrogant. Clever, but not mocking. Can you imagine living your whole life in that balancing act? Occasionally, someone extraordinary breaks the mold. Records speak of attendants who impressed emperors with sharp wit, hidden behind shy smiles, or with verses composed on the spot that outshone the scholars. Their names echo faintly in the dusty archives of the palace reminders that brilliance sometimes slipped through the cracks of rigid ritual. But more often, the tests were just filters thinning the herd until only the most pliable, most polished remained. The strangest part is how these trials turn anxiety into performance. The sweat on your palms isn't just nerves, it's another test. The tremor in your voice becomes a signal. You realize you're being judged not for who you are, but for how well you mask who you are. In a place obsessed with appearances, the act becomes the truth, and you either play the part or exit the stage entirely. You hear it before you see it, the soft scrape of sandals against polished tiles, the hiss of a lantern wick being coaxed to life. Night falls heavy over the palace, and that's when the strangest inspections begin. By day, the courtyards dazzle with sunlight and scrutiny. By night, the corridors glow with muted lanterns, shadows fluttering like restless spirits. The atmosphere feels theatrical, but no one laughs, because in this darkness, every move is magnified. The ritual is quiet but not gentle. You're guided through a chamber where silk screens cut the room into fragments, making you feel like an actor wandering backstage. Behind each screen, a watcher waits. The eunuchs tilt their lanterns just so, bathing you in shifting light that highlights angles of your face, the set of your shoulders, even the rhythm of your breath. They don't speak, but you know the score is being tallied with every flicker of the flame. It's eerie, these nighttime ceremonies. Imagine being called into a room at midnight, not knowing whether you're about to be dismissed, promoted, or simply examined like livestock. One attendant deliberately drops a tassel near your feet just to see if you'll bend to pick it up or ignore it. Another coughs softly to measure whether you flinch. Every gesture is bait, and you are the fish expected to swim the right way. Doesn't it feel exhausting just to picture it? The silence is heavy, broken only by the crackle of wicks and the occasional shuffle of robes. You start to notice how sound itself becomes a test. Do your footsteps echo too loudly? Do you breathe too fast? The room seems designed to exaggerate your presence so that even the smallest mistake feels like thunder. It reminds you of walking across a library floor when your shoes squeak at the worst possible moment, except here, the consequences are more severe than a librarian's glare. Some inspections are almost absurd. A boy might be asked to pour tea with trembling hands while 3 pairs of eyes study how the liquid curves into the cup. Another might be told to kneel and rise repeatedly, as if his knees were scrolls that could reveal character. The logic is twisted yet consistent. Every action reveals something. Obedience, patience, grace, or lack thereof. The emperor himself rarely appears at these midnight rituals, but his presence is implied in every lantern's glow. The eunuchs act as his extensions, recording impressions, testing boundaries, ensuring that by the time someone reaches the dragon throne, they are already half-shaped into the right mold. You realize the emperor doesn't need to be here. The system does the work for him. Isn't that the most unsettling part? What makes the inspections even stranger is the theater of shadows. A screen might separate you from a watcher, leaving you uncertain of who studies you. Sometimes you see the outline of a head tilt, sometimes the faint trace of a hand writing notes. It feels like being judged by ghosts. And perhaps that's the point, keeping you in a state of nervous anticipation, never sure which moment might define you. You can almost sympathize with those who falter. Imagine the pressure one misplaced, step one clumsy bow, and your name could be erased from the registry before dawn. Candidates often whispered to each other that surviving the night was harder than shining in the day. Daylight revealed flaws clearly, but nighttime exposed nerves, and nerves were far more dangerous. By the time you leave the chamber, you're not sure whether you've passed or failed. You only know that the shadows cling to your clothes, and the memory of those watching eyes lingers long after the lanterns are snuffed out. You're not a person anymore. You're just a line in a book. That's the brutal truth that hits when you see the ledgers stacked on the lacquered tables, each one filled with brushstrokes that reduce living, breathing candidates into tidy descriptions. The clerks sit cross-legged, brushes in hand, their sleeves rolled back just enough to keep ink from smudging as they copy down details with unflinching calm. One boy is noted as slender, pale, steady. Another is dismissed in 3 clipped words, blemish on cheek. No sighs, no hesitation, just the scratch of ink across paper, turning lives into entries. The process has all the sterility of an accountant tallying grain. But here the harvest is beauty. Each youth is cataloged as if he were porcelain, logged like a treasure, or a defect his worth recorded in a tone colder than the marble floors. You can't help but feel the insult of it, standing under flickering lantern light, only to be boiled down to a phrase that could fit in the corner of a ledger. Doesn't it remind you of modern forms, where people vanish into case numbers, medical codes, or a line of statistics? The eunuchs hover behind the scribes, their voices steady as they dictate. Write that his shoulders are square. Note the calmness in his walk. They are not describing souls, they are describing artifacts. And the cruelest part, the emperor will often never meet many of these boys. He will rely on the registers to filter them, as if words on paper could capture scent, tone, or spirit. A shaky brushstroke, a poorly chosen adjective, could tilt a destiny. Isn't it strange that an empire's most intimate decisions could hinge on the hand of a tired clerk? These books don't just sit around casually. They are treated like relics, locked in carved cabinets, wrapped in silk, guarded by seals. Families with ambition know their power, and bribes inevitably find their way to the desks. A pouch of silver, here a favor whispered there, and suddenly a boy's blemish vanishes from the record, replaced by a compliment about complexion, like morning frost. You can almost picture the clerk's smirk as he adjusts the ink, fully aware of the stakes. Mistakes sometimes slip through, and the palace buzzes when they do. A candidate rejected for timidity later impresses in person with quiet strength, embarrassing the scribes who misjudged him. Another praised too glowingly proves hollow once tested, and suspicion falls on whoever gilded his description. The ledgers don't just record, they haunt. Every word is an accusation waiting to resurface if the emperor feels deceived. The story shifts when you realize records alone aren't enough. A name in a book means little without the push of politics behind it. Families whisper, clans maneuver, and suddenly the emperor's bedchamber feels more like a battlefield than a sanctuary. You're no longer just polished skin and rehearsed gazes. You're a pawn in games played far above your head. Take the case of Emperor I of Han, remembered not only for his attachment to his favorite attendant, but also for the stir it caused among officials. That bond was less about affection in private and more about ripples in public. Courtiers grumbled, factions rose and fell, and all because one young man gained the emperor's ear, and by extension, influence. When you stand in those corridors, you feel the weight of that precedent pressing on your shoulders. Favor is dazzling at first. One day, you're waiting in line. Another day, you're gifted silks, jewels, perhaps even a private residence inside the palace walls. Servants bow where they once ignored you. Eunuchs suddenly speak with deference. The transformation is intoxicating. Who wouldn't feel dizzy at such a sudden ascent? Yet every glance of admiration hides a shadow of envy. Have you ever felt people cheer for you on the surface while quietly plotting your downfall? That's the daily reality here. The downfall is just as swift. A frown from the emperor, a rumor whispered at the wrong moment, a rival's subtle sabotage, and the silks vanish overnight. One moment you're draped in gold, the next, you're shuffled out through a side gate carrying only the echo of footsteps behind you. The palace has no patience for fading stars. Its hunger is always for the new, the untarnished, the exciting. You can almost hear the machinery creak as it discards yesterday's favorite to polish tomorrow's. It's not hard to see why rivals sharpen their claws. If one youth rises, another must fall, because favor is limited and influence is finite. So alliances form in shadows, bribes slide across lacquered tables, and whispers slip under doors. The emperor may think his choice is free, but the palace knows otherwise. It's nudged, tilted, manipulated. You realize with a shiver that intimacy here is never private. It's public currency. Sometimes the ambition turns tragic. A boy elevated too quickly might stumble under pressure, unable to navigate the envy of entrenched officials. Another might overplay his hand, flaunting wealth until resentment topples him. The archives record such stories in clipped tones, no drama, no pity. But behind each note is a human life, once celebrated, later discarded, like a festival lantern after dawn. And through it all, you notice how the emperor himself is caught in the web. Surrounded by advisors, pressed by clans, tempted by beauty, his choices ripple outward, shaking entire factions. When you think about it, isn't that the strangest irony? The emperor, the son of heaven, supposedly supreme, is as bound by politics as the lowest servant. His favor is a lever, but the palace hands are always tugging at it. Standing in those halls, you realize favor isn't really about affection at all. It's about survival for the chosen, for their families, for the factions betting on them. To rise is to invite envy, and to fall is to prove that envy right. Imagine walking into a chamber where the curtains are thicker than armor, yet the real battle happening inside has nothing to do with swords. The air hums not with clashing steel, but with murmurs, alliances, and subtle tilts of the head. This is politics wrapped in silk, and you standing there can't ignore how every gesture at the emperor's side doubles as a signal to the factions lurking in the shadows. What shocks you most is how intimacy, something meant to be private, becomes a public chess piece. If the emperor smiles at you at dinner, officials interpret it as policy. If he frowns, clans scurry to adjust their strategies. It's comical, really. Your blush under lantern light could tilt the balance of a tax debate, or your presence at a festival could decide which minister dares to push a petition. Doesn't it feel absurd that a glance across a table could shift an empire's gears? The palace is a theater where every role is double cast. The eunuchs act as ushers guiding the flow. The attendants, your peers, are actors, sometimes allies, sometimes rivals. The emperor is both audience and lead performer, and the courtiers outside the chamber. They are the critics scribbling mental reviews that could make or break reputations. You wonder whether anyone ever truly relaxes in this play, or if the script keeps tightening until it strangles everyone. History offers vivid examples. In later dynasties, favored attendants gained enough sway to affect appointments shaping who rose and who fell in government ranks. What began as a private bond leaked outward, staining court politics with whispers of favoritism. Ministers denounced it as corruption, while others exploited it, slipping petitions through the hands of those closest to the throne. One emperor's affection became an entire faction's weapon. You can almost picture the smirks behind fans and sleeves as ministers calculated, how do we turn tonight's smile into tomorrow's decree? The danger is obvious. If you rise too high, you're no longer just the emperor's favorite, you're a rival power center. That's when jealous officials sharpen their memorials, writing denunciations cloaked in moral outrage. The throne is clouded, they warn, by unworthy influence. Beneath the moralism lies pure self-interest, of course, but the words carry weight. And you, the once celebrated attendant, become a liability. Can you imagine lying awake, knowing tomorrow's council might debate not policy, but whether your presence is destabilizing the realm? Yet in the midst of this danger, there's also cunning. Some attendants learn to play factions off one another, granting small favors here, whispering encouragement. They're ensuring no single group claims them entirely. It's a balancing act so delicate, it feels like juggling porcelain bowls while blindfolded. Drop one, and you're finished. Keep them all aloft, and you carve out a space for survival. Still, you sense the fragility. One wrong word, one ill-timed laugh, one rumor spread by a rival, and the curtain drops. The same crowd that applauded your ascent will watch with satisfaction as you're led quietly away. And perhaps the cruelest part is that the game doesn't end when you leave. Another face will take your place. Another smile will ignite speculation, and the play continues without pause. By now you realize the palace is not simply about desire. It's about power disguised as desire, politics disguised as affection. And whether you thrive or fall depends less on the emperor's heart than on the shadows whispering around him. When the palace finally falls quiet, when the lanterns are snuffed and the echoes of footsteps fade into the stone, you're left with a truth as sharp as cold iron, beauty, power, and desire collapse faster than a paper lantern in rain. The stillness of midnight doesn't soothe, it exposes. You feel the corridors breathe differently, heavy with the ghosts of those who rose too fast and fell even faster. It's in this silence that the absurdity of it all presses hardest. Entire lives twisted around whether a clerk described skin as smooth or average. Families bribed for a favorable adjective. Eunuchs testing your soul by spilling tea. An emperor, men who ruled millions, entrusting their judgment to ledgers, whispers, and fleeting glances. Can you believe how fragile the system really was built, not on stone or law, but on preferences as thin as candle smoke? You think back on the youths you saw paraded through courtyards, perfumed, powdered, corrected, until their gazes felt artificial. Some rose, some vanished, and none had control over the pace. Their names, if remembered at all, are footnotes in dusty annals. The irony is cruel. They lived at the center of power, yet their existence was as precarious as a reed in storm winds. Isn't that the strangest contradiction, to be both at the heart of the empire and completely disposable? The emperor's favor, dazzling as it seemed, was never truly about affection. It was a lever pulled by factions, a currency traded by clans, a performance watched by the entire court. One night's smile could shift policies. One frown could end a life. What ordinary people dream of as intimacy became here nothing more than public theater dressed in silk. And yet walking those halls in your mind, you can almost hear faint laughter, the nervous chuckles of boys rehearsing poetry, the muttered jokes of servants mocking absurd metaphors about jade-like skin. Humor survives even in suffocation. Perhaps that is the only rebellion left in a place where your eyes, your scent, even your silence are policed. The echo after midnight is not just silence, it's a warning. All systems built on fragile vanity eventually crumble. The Forbidden City still stands its roofs gleaming under Beijing skies, but the ledgers have yellowed, the perfumes evaporated, and the names once whispered with envy are forgotten. What remains is the lesson when desire becomes bureaucracy. Humanity is the first casualty. You leave behind the echo of polished corridors, where emperors judged beauty like merchants inspecting silk. But the story doesn't end with the choosing. Once the candidates were selected, they vanished into another world entirely, a place sealed tighter than any fortress, the imperial harem. If the outer palace was about selection, the inner chambers were about survival. Here, alliances were woven in whispers, betrayals bloomed behind painted fans, and the pursuit of favor turned into a ruthless game that stretched across decades. You think you've seen spectacle already. The darker secrets of the harem will prove you wrong. You push through the vermilion gates of the Forbidden City, and it feels less like stepping into a palace and more like sliding into the belly of a creature that never quite digests what it swallows. The courtyards echo with your footsteps, but the walls seem to lean closer, as if listening. You can almost hear 1,000 stories buzzing like trapped flies behind those crimson doors, secrets stitched into curtains and whispered under painted ceilings. The air smells faintly of incense and damp stone, yet beneath it lurks something sharper, the scent of ambition, the tang of fear. You wonder, do the people outside really know what happens once those gates swing shut? They picture silk gowns. The deeper you wander, the more the silence feels unnatural. You pass courtyards so wide they could host an army, yet they stand deserted, except for a few carved lions staring with blank eyes. The emptiness itself is a message. This isn't just a palace. It's a stage where only a chosen few are allowed to perform. Everyone else, servants, guards, even ministers, vanishes like scenery that doesn't matter once the curtain falls. Isn't it strange how the grandest places often feel the loneliest? Think of a billionaire's mansion today, dozens of rooms, yet the owner usually eats dinner alone in a kitchen no larger than yours. The Forbidden City carried that same paradox, a dazzling fortress, hiding an ocean of solitude. Your eyes catch on the layers of red lacquer coating the doors. Paint meant to symbolize good fortune instead feels oppressive, like it's trapping luck inside instead of sharing it. Imagine living your whole life within these walls, never again seeing a marketplace, never hearing the chaos of ordinary streets. To outsiders, it's a privilege. To those inside, it's a velvet prison. Many of the women who crossed this threshold as concubines entered with excitement, even pride. Yet behind these gates, their names were slowly erased, reduced to titles and ranks. The harem didn't just house women, it consumed identities. You pause near one of the carved stone bridges, stretching over an artificial stream. The water looks serene, but history reminds you it once reflected the faces of countless palace women who never walked back out. Some arrived as teenagers, chosen from across the empire, believing this would be their path to power, or at least security for their families. Yet for many, the gates became a one-way trip, their laughter fading into whispers as they sank into the shadows of the emperor's whims. Have you ever noticed how ambition can feel like a doorway, at first only to lock from the inside once you step through? Even the architecture joins the conspiracy. Roofs curve upward like frozen waves, dragons coil in tiles overhead, and every corridor funnels you deeper into the labyrinth. The scale is overwhelming, yet it isn't designed to impress you. It's designed to control you. The longer you walk, the more you lose track of direction until you're forced to rely on officials and eunuchs who know every turn. Power here isn't just held by the emperor. It's built into the very bricks, reminding everyone that they are small pieces in a machine much older and colder than themselves. And so you move further inside, past bronze cauldrons once filled with water in case of fire, past massive courtyards where only a handful of chosen women would ever be seen. Each step takes you closer to the heart of the empire, yet further from the world outside. The laughter of children in the streets, the cries of vendors, the warmth of ordinary family life, all of it fades into memory. Here, the only sounds are rustling robes, murmured orders, and the faint clink of jade bracelets when a nervous hand trembles. The forbidden city hides its truths in silence, but silence itself can be deafening. You don't need screams to sense danger. You don't need gossip to feel intrigue. Just the heavy stillness of a palace that has seen too many schemes, too many broken hearts, too many dreams crushed beneath embroidered slippers. And as you stand here with the gates locked behind you, the weight of all those stories presses against your shoulders. You don't get far before realizing the real gatekeepers of this palace aren't the soldiers with halberds, but the pale-faced eunuchs who hover like shadows at every doorway. Their eyes, sharp as knives, sweep across you with unnerving precision. They may look harmless thin figures in long robes, voices pitched higher than usual, but in truth, they are the ones who decide who moves and who stays, who rises and who falls. Think about it in a world where men were supposed to embody strength. The emperor trusted most, the ones who could never produce sons. Isn't it ironic that those stripped of power in one sense ended up wielding the most in another? They shuffle silently, sleeves dangling, yet their presence is louder than any drumbeat. Records tell us some eunuchs became so influential that emperors leaned on them more than on ministers or generals. Take Wei Zhongxian in the Ming dynasty. His name alone sent officials into shivers. He started as a palace servant, but by whispering into the right ears and manipulating harem politics, he became one of the most feared figures in China. He controlled memorials sent to the throne, decided who got to see the emperor, and punished anyone who dared cross him. Imagine working in an office today where the receptionist, who technically answers phones, also controls whether your boss even reads your emails. That's the kind of bottleneck power eunuchs held. You notice how they seem to float rather than walk, and the way their eyes dart quickly, always calculating. Every smile feels practiced, every bow exaggerated just enough to remind you that nothing here is genuine. The emperor might be the son of heaven, but without eunuchs, even he couldn't run this machine. They were the oil that kept the gears turning, and sometimes the sand that made the gears grind until sparks flew. Is it really surprising that emperors often feared them as much as they relied on them? Their loyalty, of course, was supposed to be absolute. Since they had no family lines to protect, the logic went, they would serve only the emperor. But history rarely follows logic. Some eunuchs built secret networks, adopting protégés or smuggling riches outside the palace. The irony is hard to miss. Men stripped of bloodlines ended up constructing invisible families of influence, passing power not by birth, but by favor. One wrong glance from you here, one whispered complaint, and your life could be twisted by the flick of a eunuch's hand. It wasn't just about guarding the emperor. It was about controlling access, filtering the flow of information, like a dam deciding which streams reach the throne. And yes, their control extended deeply into the harem itself. Before an emperor even saw a potential concubine, eunuchs had already made judgments on her looks, her manners, her scent, even the way she walked. They became tastemakers in the most literal sense. A poor impression in their eyes could mean obscurity for life, no matter how beautiful or talented a girl might be. Doesn't it remind you of today's entertainment industries, where casting agents and managers decide who even gets into the audition room? The faces on posters may be famous, but behind them are always invisible hands pulling strings. It's unsettling to realize how much depended on them. The women of the harem had to please not only the emperor, but also the eunuchs, who managed every detail of their existence. Even the smallest privileges, a better chamber, a new robe, a chance to perform a song before the throne, came through eunuch approval. Their neutrality was a myth. In practice, their favoritism could tilt the balance of history. You might call it gatekeeping in its purest, sharpest form. So as you stand in another hushed corridor, you catch one eunuch's eyes, and he doesn't blink. It feels less like he's looking at you, and more like he's weighing you, measuring how much you might matter or not at all. And in that moment, you understand the cruel truth. In the Forbidden City, survival wasn't about strength or beauty alone. It was about who chose to open the right doors for you. The scent of sandalwood lingers as you drift deeper, and suddenly you realize the next contest isn't fought with words or politics, but with skin scent and grace. The palace had its own standards of beauty, and they weren't gentle. Young women were inspected as though they were jade carvings, polished and appraised their worth, measured in smoothness and symmetry, skin without blemish. That could mean the difference between living in luxury or fading into the background like wallpaper. Even the faintest scar from childhood could be the end of a dream. Doesn't it sound uncomfortably close to the way modern industries still worship flawless images on magazine covers? You pass a chamber where servants grind powders into fine dust, white lead for a ghostly complexion, crushed pearls for an impossible sheen. Concubines coated themselves in layers that promised perfection, but delivered poison. Many suffered slowly from the very cosmetics meant to elevate them. Yet what choice did they have? Refuse the ritual, and you risked irrelevance. Submit to it, and you shined in the moment, but risked your health in the long run. Think of how today's obsession with extreme beauty treatments echoes the same dangerous bargain: gain attention, now pay the price later. It wasn't only the face that mattered. Fragrance, too, was a silent weapon. Girls were bathed in scented waters, their hair rubbed with oils, their robes stored with sachets of crushed flowers. A single whiff could determine favor, as emperors were said to remember women more by their scent than by their names. Historical notes tell of one Tang emperor who described his favorite concubine's perfume as lingering on his clothes long after she left. Imagine being reduced to the memory of a fragrance, your entire identity hanging on whether someone liked the way you smelled. Then there was the art of movement. Walking wasn't just walking, it was choreography. The shuffle of embroidered slippers, the subtle sway of silk, the way a sleeve lifted, just so all of it rehearsed, judged, and memorized. If you've ever seen a model on a runway, you know how one misstep can ruin the whole effect. For palace women, that one misstep could erase years of preparation. Some dynasties even required young girls to train under older palace women in how to smile bow and even laugh correctly. The spontaneity of being human was slowly sculpted into performance. The comparisons with today practically write themselves. Modern reality shows or pageants may crown winners with tiaras, but here the prize was a place in the emperor's gaze. And like reality shows, the odds were cruel. Hundreds might compete, only a handful remembered. The rest, they stayed in back halls, their lives dimming like candles left too long in the corner. The emperor couldn't possibly know them all. Yet, they were trapped here anyway, kept in reserve, like silent ornaments. Isn't it chilling to imagine your whole life hinging on whether one man glanced your way? Once even the tiniest details mattered. Fingernails buffed to shine teeth, examined for straightness, hair combed into elaborate coils that spoke of status and obedience. You're reminded of job interviews today, where applicants are told to smile naturally while knowing every micro-expression is being scored. In the palace, it wasn't about landing a job, it was about securing survival. And so as you stand watching a girl adjust her silk sleeves, you notice the tremor in her hands. She knows that every slip of her robe, every tilt of her head is another brushstroke on the canvas of her fate. Outside the walls, people imagine the harem as a paradise of beauty. Inside, you see it for what it really was, an endless audition, where failure meant not rejection. Back to normal life, but a quiet existence fading behind layers of red walls. You can feel it in the air. This is where a single glance could crown you or erase you. The first thing you notice is how carefully rehearsed it all is. Women are coached to lower their eyes just enough to signal obedience, but not so low as to look dull. They must meet the emperor's gaze just long enough to spark curiosity, but not so long that it feels like defiance. One wrong flicker, one misplaced blink, and a girl could be remembered as insolent or worse, invisible. Isn't it strange that power often comes down to something as fleeting as eye contact? Picture yourself standing in a lantern-lit hall where dozens of hopeful faces wait behind embroidered curtains. The silence hums with tension, broken only by the shuffle of silk slippers. The emperor enters, and suddenly every muscle in every body stiffens. This is the moment their families prayed for, the moment they've endured endless training for. Yet the outcome may hinge on nothing more than how their eyes meet his. Have you ever been on a first date or a job interview where you rehearsed every word, but the whole atmosphere shifted based on how you looked at the other person? Multiply that by 10,000, and you'll feel the stakes here. Historical accounts remind us that some concubines gained power not through beauty alone, but through mastering this art of the gaze. Wu Zetian, who eventually rose to become the only female emperor in Chinese history, began as a concubine of Emperor Taizong. She was remembered for her intelligence and poise, but contemporaries also wrote about her eyes, sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. That piercing gaze became part of her legend. It wasn't softness that saved her. It was the ability to look directly at power without flinching and to know exactly when to lower her gaze again. And yet most women didn't get to wield such skill. They were taught to smile faintly, to let their lashes flutter like moth wings, to appear both modest and enticing. The balance was absurd. Too much boldness, and you were branded dangerous. Too much meekness, and you were discarded as dull. It's not hard to see echoes of this in modern workplaces or social settings where women are often told to be confident, but not too confident. Doesn't it feel like the rules keep shifting just enough to ensure you can never really win? The inspections could feel like theater. Some emperors would sit in silence, eyes gliding over the women like a painter, surveying canvases. Others might make comments subtle or cruel while attendants scribbled notes in registers. And through it all, the women's gazes remained weapons cloaked as glances. A quick sparkle of wit in the eyes might catch attention more than any jewel. A single mistake, a glance that lingered one heartbeat too long, could invite suspicion of ambition. Here, every glance was a gamble. You can't help but think of modern celebrities caught on camera, every smirk or frown dissected by millions. One look taken out of context can spark scandal-shift public opinion, or even end careers. Now imagine that kind of scrutiny condensed into one man's perception inside a palace that controlled the lives of thousands. So as you stand in that hall, you sense how fragile it all was. These women were told their future lay in beauty, but really their survival often came down to a few seconds of eye contact under flickering candlelight. And as strange as it sounds, those seconds could ripple through history, shaping not just personal fates, but the rise and fall of dynasties. By now, you've seen the polished faces and practiced glances, but the palace demanded more than pretty eyes. Step into the hidden training halls, and you'd find rows of young girls drilled like soldiers, except their weapons weren't swords, but instruments, etiquette, and silence. Day after day, they repeated bows until their backs ached, practiced calligraphy until their wrists stiffened, and memorized rules so strict that even sneezing at the wrong time could be deemed disrespectful. Doesn't it sound exhausting to have your humanity scrubbed away in favor of perfect performance? The training wasn't glamorous. Imagine being woken before dawn to rehearse music you might never play before the emperor, or to learn dances you might never perform. Still, you had to be ready, because one sudden summons could throw you into the spotlight. Failure meant ridicule, or worse, banishment to some forgotten corner of the palace. It's not unlike how athletes or performers train today, pouring years into preparation, while knowing only a few will ever see the spotlight. You picture a row of girls plucking guzheng strings, their fingers trembling each note supposed to drip like water onto jade. The sound is beautiful, but their faces tell another story. Fear of slipping, fear of standing out the wrong way, fear of being overlooked altogether. And always, the overseers watched, with hawk eyes, ready to scold, ready to correct. This wasn't education for joy. It was education for survival. Even silence itself was trained. Women learned how to stand without fidgeting, how to hold their breath at the right moment, how to listen without betraying emotion. One Ming record notes that palace women were punished for laughing too loudly in corridors, as if joy itself could threaten the order. Can you imagine living in a place where even laughter is dangerous? And then there was etiquette, the endless choreography of kneeling, bowing, rising, and addressing superiors with precisely the right words. The smallest slip of the tongue could spark suspicion. A wrong title, a delayed response, and suddenly you were branded careless or insolent. Some girls spent years perfecting phrases they might only use once in their lives. Doesn't it feel absurd to think of hours wasted rehearsing greetings, all for a moment that may never come? Real examples show how these rules shape destinies. Empress Dowager Cixi, for instance, was not originally the most beautiful or highest-ranked concubine, but she impressed with sharp wit, refined behavior, and the ability to navigate palace rituals flawlessly. That discipline became her ladder to power. She learned the system so well that she eventually bent it to her will, ruling behind the curtain for decades. Her story is proof that training wasn't just about obedience, it could be turned into leverage. Still, for most women, the training halls felt like prisons dressed as schools. Their individuality was chipped away, leaving polished shells designed to serve, not to thrive. The irony. The emperor himself might never notice most of them, no matter how perfect their bows or how elegant their brushstrokes. They trained for an audience of one, yet lived under the scrutiny of hundreds. So when you step back from the hall, the echo of Guzheng notes still trembling in your ears, you realize the truth. The harem wasn't simply a place of beauty. It was an assembly line, churning out idealized images of womanhood, each crafted to fit a mold the palace demanded. And like any assembly line, most products ended up in storage forgotten before they were ever used. You'd think after all that training, a woman's fate might rest on talent or charm. But sometimes, it came down to something far less dignified: luck. In certain dynasties, the emperor's choice of concubines was shrouded in secrecy, carried out through rituals that felt more like lotteries than courtship. Imagine standing in line while officials scribbled names into registers, then waiting to see if your number was called, not to win a prize, but to determine the course of your entire life. Doesn't it sound like gambling with human destinies? The system varied over time, but one infamous method was the name slip ritual. Palace women's names were written on small plaques or slips stored in boxes or trays and presented to the emperor. He could pick blindly or sometimes flip through them like cards choosing at a whim. To outsiders, it might have looked like divine will. To the women involved, it was terrifyingly random. What if your name was never drawn? What if it was drawn at the wrong moment when the emperor was in a foul mood? A single flick of the wrist could decide decades of your future. Some records describe even stranger practices. In the Qing dynasty, for example, there were tales of embroidered purses being laid out, each holding a concubine's token. The emperor would reach inside, and whichever purse he pulled out marked the woman summoned for that night. Picture that years of grooming, endless discipline, all distilled into the luck of a drawstring bag. Isn't it chilling how human beings were reduced to the level of lottery tickets? The process didn't end there. After the emperor's choice, eunuchs and attendants recorded every detail, the date, the name, sometimes even the weather. These weren't love stories. They were bureaucratic transactions. Historians note that some emperors treated the system with cold indifference, seeing women as entries in a ledger rather than individuals. To be chosen wasn't always a blessing. It could mean advancement, yes, but it could also mean being caught in jealous crossfire or subjected to scrutiny you weren't prepared for. Real history gives us examples of how these selections shaped power struggles. Take consort Zhen during the late Qing dynasty. She was chosen and favored by Emperor Guangxu, not merely for her beauty, but for her quick intelligence. Yet that very favoritism stirred resentment, drawing the wrath of Empress Dowager Cixi. Consort Jen's tragic fate, eventually ordered to be drowned in a well during the Boxer Rebellion, reminds you that being lucky enough to be chosen could just as easily be a death sentence. It's hard not to compare this to modern systems that disguise randomness as fairness. Think of job applications filtered by algorithms or casting calls where thousands apply, but only a handful are seen. The illusion is that merit decides the outcome, but often chance and unseen bias play a bigger role. The imperial harem was no different, except the stakes weren't careers or paychecks, but entire lives spent behind walls. As you picture the emperor's hand hovering over slips of wood or silk purses, you can almost feel the tension of those women waiting in silence, hearts racing, breath shallow, each praying for fate to lean their way, yet knowing fate was fickle. The irony, even if you weren't chosen, you still couldn't leave. You remained within the palace, aging behind curtains, a name in a register that might never be called. So you step back from that imagined lottery table, realizing that in the Forbidden City, destiny wasn't written in stars or scriptures. It was scribbled on wooden plaques, shuffled by eunuchs, and decided in the most impersonal of ways. And the cruelest part, nobody ever asked the women what they wanted. Lanterns flicker in the night, and this is where the palace truly transforms into theater. By day, the courtyards look orderly and ceremonial, but after dark, the routines twist into something stranger: midnight inspections, known as bedchamber rituals. The emperor's visits weren't simply private affairs. They were choreographed ceremonies with eunuchs recording every step. Imagine standing in a room where your entire intimacy is observed, noted, and stamped in a ledger. Does that sound like luxury? Or like surveillance disguised as romance? The preparations began long before the emperor even arrived. Concubines were bathed, powdered dressed, and perfumed, often by nervous attendants who knew that any mistake, an uneven braid, a robe tied crookedly, could cost them their own positions. Women were expected to wait in silence, sometimes kneeling behind screens until summoned. The moment could come at midnight or not at all. The suspense itself was torture. How do you sleep, knowing that at any moment a eunuch could appear at your door with an imperial command? Accounts from the Qing dynasty describe how the chosen woman was carried to the emperor's chamber under strict rules. In some cases, she had to be wrapped in a quilt and transported by eunuchs almost like cargo. The ritual was so rigid that it stripped away any pretense of choice. Think about it in a palace where appearances mattered so much, even the act of entering the emperor's bed had to be codified like a legal document. And the testing didn't stop at appearances. Some emperors, paranoid about loyalty or illness, ordered bizarre inspections. There are records of women being examined under lamplight, their bodies scrutinized as though they were artworks with flaws to be cataloged. It's unsettling, isn't it? The same way people today are judged under harsh lights in auditions or casting calls. Except here, the stakes weren't a role, but survival in the emperor's favor. Not every emperor treated the ritual the same. Some, like Emperor Yongzheng of the Qing, were known for their strict discipline, keeping everything orderly and clockwork-like. Others indulged in extravagance, summoning multiple women in a single evening, as if testing loyalty through numbers. The women had no power in these arrangements. They were performers in a play where the script was written entirely by someone else. The cruelty lay in the aftermath, too. Eunuchs meticulously recorded which concubine spent the night with the emperor, and whether any results might come of it. If nothing happened, the woman might be seen as unlucky or even defective. Can you imagine the pressure of having your personal life reduced to checkboxes in a bureaucrat's notebook? Yet within these rituals, some women found ways to resist subtle gestures hidden in plain sight. A faint pause before bowing, a glance shared with another concubine, a whispered word to a servant. Tiny cracks in the mask, small rebellions that reminded them they were still human. Those moments rarely made the records, but they mattered to the women themselves. As you picture the glow of lanterns on lacquered screens, you realize these nights weren't just about indulgence. They were about control, surveillance, and the constant reminder that even in the most private spaces, the emperor's gaze, and by extension, history's gaze, never truly left. By now, you've seen how even night was regimented. But the daylight hours offered no escape. The harem itself was a maze of ranks, each level stacked like steps on a staircase that only a handful could climb. At the top sat the empress, glittering in authority, and beneath her stretched a hierarchy so dizzying it could make a minister's head spin. Every woman had a title, from noble consort to concubine, from attendant to maid, each rung marked by rules so detailed they filled entire manuals. Doesn't it remind you of a corporate office chart today, with endless managers, assistants, and supervisors, all desperate to claw upward? The titles weren't just names. They dictated everything. Where a woman lived, what she wore, how many servants she commanded, even what dishes she could eat. A higher rank meant finer silks, brighter jewels, and better chambers near the emperor. A lower rank meant plain robes, distant quarters, and a future spent in obscurity. Imagine walking into a dining hall where the color of your sleeve determined whether you sat at the front or were pushed to the back. That was the daily reality inside the Forbidden City. The rules could get absurdly precise. In the Qing dynasty, for example, regulations stated exactly how many hairpins a woman of each rank could wear: 2 for one level, 3 for another, jeweled, or plain, depending on her status. Even the number of candles allowed in her chamber was prescribed. It's almost comical until you realize those tiny details were traps. Step out of line with one too many ornaments, and you risk punishment for arrogance. It's like showing up to a workplace in a car too nice for your salary bracket. Suddenly everyone's whispering. But this ladder wasn't stable. Promotions and demotions came suddenly, often tied to whether a woman caught the emperor's attention or bore him children. A single night of favor could elevate someone from obscurity to influence, while one slip of the tongue could send her plummeting down the hierarchy. The palace thrived on instability, keeping everyone anxious, everyone watching each other. Doesn't it feel familiar to how modern reality shows thrive on constant eliminations and promotions to keep contestants on edge? Historical examples bring this to life. Empress Wang of the Tang Dynasty held her position through rank and ritual. But when Wu Zetian gained the emperor's favor, Wang's authority crumbled. Wu maneuvered through the ranks, rising step by step until she eclipsed everyone, eventually claiming the throne herself. Her story shows how even within rigid hierarchies, ambition and cunning could bend the rules. Yet for every Wu Zetian, there were thousands whose names vanished, women who never moved a single rung up the ladder. This ranking system bred paranoia. Allies were rare. Rivals were everywhere. A woman's success often meant another's downfall. Every smile concealed calculation. Every gift concealed a test. Servants carried messages not just across courtyards, but across invisible battle lines. You can imagine the tension simmering under polite greetings, like coworkers competing for the same promotion while pretending to be friends at lunch. And so, as you walk through those endless corridors, you can almost hear the rustle of silk skirts brushing past one another each step, carrying unspoken competition. The hierarchy promised order, but what it really created was chaos, a constant struggle where a single promotion could change the course of history and a single mistake could bury a life in silence. Step closer to the center of power, and you'll find one figure whose presence dominates the entire harem, the Empress. Officially, she was the mother of the realm, crowned with solemn rituals and recognized as the empire's first lady. But within these walls, her role often resembled something colder. Part ruler, part warden, part survivalist. She wasn't just a wife to the emperor. She was the overseer of hundreds of rivals, each waiting for her to falter. Doesn't it make you wonder if the crown was a prize or a burden? The empress controlled every aspect of the harem, from promotions and punishments to the flow of daily life. If a concubine misstepped, it wasn't the emperor who dealt with her, it was the empress. Imagine running a company where you weren't just the CEO, but also the HR manager, security guard, and judge all at once. That was her reality. And unlike modern positions of power, she couldn't resign. Once crowned, she was locked into the role for life, no matter how dangerous it became. Her authority was reinforced by ritual. She presided over ceremonies, handed out robes, and supervised the upbringing of imperial children. The emperor's offspring might be born from concubines, but they were often raised under the empress's watchful eye. It gave her leverage, but also endless enemies. Concubines who hoped their sons might one day inherit the throne knew they had to curry her favor or quietly plot around her. Think of Dowager Empress Lu from the Han Dynasty, who wielded the title with such ruthlessness that she effectively ruled the empire after her husband's death. Her story is a reminder that the empress wasn't always a passive figure in the background. Sometimes she was the sharpest blade in the palace. Yet the crown came with constant threats. If the emperor lost interest in her, her authority weakened. If a concubine rose too quickly in favor, the empress risked being overshadowed. Empress Wang of the Tang Dynasty learned this when Wu Zetian's growing influence reduced her to a shadow of herself, eventually leading to her downfall. Imagine the humiliation of holding the title of empress, yet feeling powerless in your own home. Inside the palace, whispers of poison and betrayal often pointed back to jealousies surrounding the empress. She had to balance mercy and cruelty carefully. Too merciful, and rivals would take advantage. Too cruel, and she risked backlash. The line between protector and oppressor blurred daily. Isn't it striking how the supposed most secure woman in the realm was often the most precarious of all? And then there was the personal toll. Every smile had to be measured, every word weighed. Even her robes symbolized power. The number of phoenixes embroidered on her gown was regulated, a visual reminder of her rank. But beneath the silks and jewels, she was still a woman navigating a cage filled with enemies. You can almost feel the exhaustion, a lifetime of watching her back, mistrusting every compliment, sleeping lightly in chambers that glowed with wealth but hummed with paranoia. So as you picture the empress sitting on her raised platform, attendants bowing at her feet, remember that her power was both her armor and her trap. She reigned over the harem, yes, but she also carried the heaviest chains bound by duty, suspicion, and the endless weight of survival in a palace that trusted no one. You've seen power games and rivalries, But what truly chills the harem are the whispers, those murmurs about poison drifting like smoke through silk curtains. The palace kitchens, the cosmetic jars, even the very robes a concubine wore could all become weapons. Doesn't it make your skin crawl to think that beauty itself could carry slow death? Start with cosmetics. Women prized pale complexions, so powders of lead and mercury were ground fine and applied daily. At first, the effect was dazzling skin as smooth as porcelain, but over time the toxins gnawed at the body, causing tremor, weakness, and even madness. Some concubines may never have realized that the very tools of their allure were draining their lives. It's not far from how modern beauty trends sometimes push dangerous extremes from crash diets to untested treatments, all in the name of appearance. The cost of beauty then and now can be deadly. Perfumes and ointments carried risks too. Historical records mention suspicious cases where fragrant oils made a favored woman ill-leaving rivals conveniently untouched. Poison didn't always come in a chalice. Sometimes it clung invisibly to the very scent of luxury. The idea is horrifying. Imagine your favorite perfume slowly betraying you. And then there was food. The emperor's meals were famously tested by eunuchs, but concubines weren't always so lucky. Kitchens were hives of intrigue, where a pinch too much of one spice could mask something sinister. Servants loyal to one faction could slip powders into soups or tease their victims, never certain whether illness was natural or designed. Some stories tell of women who grew paranoid enough to taste nothing but plain rice, fearing every colorful dish. Can you imagine living in a place where even your dinner plate felt like a battlefield? Even clothing wasn't safe. There are tales, half rumor, half possibility, of garments treated with slow poisons that entered the body through the skin. A new robe might sparkle with embroidery, yet each wear weakened the one who donned it. Whether or not every rumor was true, the fear itself was enough to keep women glancing suspiciously at gifts and offerings. Every gesture of kindness could hide a trap. History provides chilling examples. During the reign of Emperor Jiajing in the Ming Dynasty palace, women once plotted to poison him with immortality elixirs laced with toxic herbs. The plot failed, but the story underlined how poison and paranoia stalked every corridor. And on the other side of history, Empress Dowager Cixi was accused, though never proven, of eliminating rivals through carefully administered concoctions. Fact or slander, the accusations revealed just how deeply poison was entwined with palace imagination. Doesn't it feel eerily like modern workplaces, where sabotage might not be literal poison, but whispered rumors undercutting colleagues' reputations? In both cases, the tools are subtle, invisible, and devastating. A poisoned cup of tea or a poisoned word, each could be just as lethal in its own world. As you wander past the kitchens with their smoking cauldrons and glimpse shelves of gleaming porcelain jars, you can almost hear the heartbeat of fear. Nothing in the harem was simply what it seemed. Beauty, fragrance, food, and silk were supposed to delight. Yet in the Forbidden City, they doubled as instruments of death. And the cruelest truth, no one could ever be sure which gift to accept, which dish to trust, which robe to wear. Step into the quieter corners of the palace, and you'll notice a different kind of fear, the silent dread of childlessness. In the harem bearing, a son was the golden ticket, the one sure way to secure influence and safety. Without children, a woman's status was fragile, like a candle flickering in a draft. Doesn't it strike you as cruel that a life's worth could be judged by something so far beyond one's control? The expectation was immense. Families sent daughters to the palace with dreams that one day she might give birth to the next emperor. A concubine who succeeded often rose in rank, instantly showered with attention and gifts. But if months turned to years with no pregnancy, her prospects withered. She risked being sidelined, forgotten, or even despised. You can almost hear the unspoken question echoing in those chambers. What good are you if you cannot produce an heir? History is filled with women who lived under this pressure. Empress Shu of the Ming dynasty, for example, faced constant scrutiny when she failed to bear sons. Though respected for her wisdom and compassion, her inability to provide heirs haunted her reign. Meanwhile, concubines who bore children, even if they had no other talents, could suddenly wield enormous influence. Doesn't it remind you of how society today sometimes still measures women by roles they may or may not choose, instead of their individual worth? And the stakes weren't only personal, they were political. A son born to a favored concubine could shake the entire balance of the court, creating factions around his potential claim to the throne. Other women grew desperate, resorting to dangerous remedies to boost fertility, some of which did more. Then there were the crueler outcomes. Women who bore only daughters often faced quiet disappointment, even if the child was healthy and strong. Daughters were precious in their own right, but in the logic of succession, they didn't count. Imagine the heartbreak of giving life, yet being told it wasn't enough. Some records even tell of concubines feigning illness or withdrawing from social life, overwhelmed by shame they hadn't earned. The curse of childlessness could also be weaponized. Rivals whispered accusations of infertility or spread rumors of illnesses that supposedly made a woman unfit. Once branded that way, recovery was nearly impossible. The label stuck whether true or not. Doesn't it sound hauntingly similar to modern smear campaigns where a single false rumor can derail reputations for years? Yet amid the cruelty, some women managed to adapt. They became confidants, advisors, or caretakers, finding other ways to stay relevant. Empress Yongsun of the Tang dynasty, though she did bear children, became celebrated not only for motherhood, but for her wisdom in guiding Emperor Taizong. Her story reminds you that value could sometimes be redefined, though never without effort, never without risk. So as you stand in those hushed chambers, the embroidered cradles, waiting silently in the corner, you sense the heaviness of expectation that hung over every woman's head. To the outside world, the harem glittered with jewels and silks, but inside every empty cradle was a verdict, every missed chance a shadow. And in a place where shadows lasted longer than memories, childlessness wasn't just a personal sorrow. It was a slow erasure. Walk a little farther into the palace, and the atmosphere shifts again. Beyond the gilded halls and ceremonial courtyards lie quiet quarters where forgotten women lived out their days. Concubines, once chosen, now discarded, fading like ink on weathered scrolls. These weren't dramatic falls from power. They were slow exiles, hidden in plain sight. Isn't it eerie to think of lives once filled with hope, now reduced to silence behind embroidered curtains? Their punishment wasn't execution or banishment from the palace. It was worse, in some ways confinement in comfort. They had food, clothing, even attendance, but no freedom and no future. Imagine being housed in velvet-lined chambers, yet knowing the world outside would never again be yours. It's the paradox of gilded captivity. much like celebrities today, who retreat into mansions when fame burns out surrounded by luxury but starved of purpose. The loneliness was profound. Concubines who lost the emperor's favor were rarely seen again. They wandered shaded courtyards, stitched endless embroidery, or prayed in temple-like rooms built within the palace walls. Their laughter, once rehearsed to charm, faded into whispers. Many lived into old age, their names forgotten even by the officials who kept their records. Doesn't it make you wonder if obscurity hurts more when you once tasted importance? Real history provides examples of these quiet exiles. Concubines of the Ming and Qing dynasties, who fell from grace, often ended their lives in remote palace apartments, barred from contact with family. Even letters home were forbidden, severing ties to the world that had once raised them. They became ghosts in their own lifetimes, existing in the Forbidden City, but no longer part of its story. Some tried to find solace in art or religion. Records mention women who turned to painting poetry or Buddhist devotion. A few works have survived delicate brushstrokes and verses filled with longing, speaking of skies they could no longer see or rivers they would never cross again. Their creativity was their rebellion, a reminder that even when silenced, their inner voices couldn't be erased. But not all endured gracefully. There are accounts of concubines falling into despair, succumbing to illness or apathy. Some became pawns in further intrigues dragged back into politics when factions needed them only to be discarded again. The cruelty lay not in open violence, but in neglect. Isn't it chilling how neglect itself can be as lethal as a blade? The empress or senior consorts often controlled the fate of these women, assigning them to out-of-the-way quarters. To the rest of the harem, they served as cautionary tales, walking reminders of what happened when favor vanished. Each bowed head, each faded robe, was a silent warning rise. Carefully, for the fall is longer than you think. So, as you stand in one of those dim chambers, the air heavy with incense, masking the smell of damp wood, you can almost sense their presence. Women who once dreamed of shaping dynasties ended up pacing the same small courtyards for decades, their jewels gathering dust, their voices swallowed by silence. And perhaps the cruelest secret of all is this: the palace didn't need to kill them to erase them. It only needed to forget. You might think the harem was all obedience and submission, but if you listen closely, you'll catch the faint rustle of silk concealing rebellion. Not loud uprisings, no swords or banners, but subtle acts of defiance that unsettled the palace like pebbles dropped into still water. Doesn't it intrigue you that even in the most controlled environment, people still found ways to push back? Letters were one form of quiet resistance. Though outside contact was strictly forbidden, some concubines bribed eunuchs or servants to smuggle secret notes to family or allies. A few of these letters survive, filled with coded metaphors about longing injustice or plots brewing behind closed doors. Imagine risking everything for a scrap of paper slipped through a crack in the wall. It sounds small, yet in a place where silence was enforced, even a whisper could roar. Then there were the glances, tiny deliberate signals exchanged across banquet halls or during rituals. A raised eyebrow, a hand lingering on a cup, a look held a fraction too long. To outsiders, meaningless. To insiders, messages as sharp as daggers. Concubines who couldn't speak freely mastered this language of the eyes. It's not so different from today's workplaces, where a side glance across a meeting table can say more than a whole speech. Some women took bolder steps. Historical records speak of concubines who hid forbidden books in their chambers, reading philosophies that encouraged independent thought. Others composed poems that on the surface praised the emperor, but carried veiled criticism between the lines. One Qing-era concubine wrote verses comparing herself to a caged bird, singing for freedom, a metaphor anyone in her position would understand instantly. Isn't it remarkable how creativity itself becomes rebellion when freedom is denied? Of course, these small acts were dangerous. Being caught could mean demotion, isolation, or worse. Yet resistance persisted, proving that even the strictest hierarchies couldn't stamp out human will. Some rebellions spread wider. In the Ming Dynasty, a group of palace women once conspired to overthrow Emperor Jiajing, drugging him with potions during his obsession with Taoist immortality.